is your name, please?
My name is Moses.
What is your name, please?
My name is Moses.
What is your name, please?
My name is Moses.
Two of these people are imposters. Only one of them is the real,
Moses.
is the only one who is telling nothing but the truth.
Moses ben Maimon, commonly known as Maimonides. Maimonides was also referred to by the acronym Rambam and was a medieval Sephardic Jewish philosopher who became the most prolific and influential Torah scholars of the Middle Ages. In his time, he was also a preeminent astronomer and physician born in Cordoba, Almoravid Empire, which is present-day Spain. He worked as a rabbi, physician, and philosopher in Morocco and Egypt. Born March 28, 1135, died December 12, 1204, Fasat, Ayyubid, Sultanate in present-day Egypt. Maimonides, and also referred to the acronym Rambam, Rambam, was a medieval Sephardic Jewish philosopher. What is a Sephardic Jew? It's a Latino Jew. That's what a Sephardic Jew is, Spanish Jew, who became one of the most prolific and influential Torah scholars of the Middle Ages. In his time, he was also a preeminent astronomer and a physician born in Cordoba, the Almoravid Empire, and he worked as a rabbi, physician, and philosopher in Morocco and in Egypt. He died in Egypt on December 12, 1204, whence his body was taken to the Lower Galilee and buried in Tiberias. During his lifetime, most Jews greeted Maimonides' writings on Jewish law and ethics with acclaim and with gratitude, even as far away as Iraq and Yemen. Yet, while Maimonides rose to become the revered head of the Jewish community in Egypt, it was a big Jewish community at one point in history in Egypt. So he rose to become the revered head of that Jewish community in Egypt, and his copious works comprises a cornerstone of Jewish scholarship. So whatever he wrote is a fixed in the library of Jewish scholarship, and it is a cornerstone. And that cornerstone unites two different walls, okay, as we're going to read. His 14-volume Mishnah Torah still carries significant canonical authority as a codification of Talmudic law. He is sometimes known as Hanesha Hagadol, which means the great eagle. in recognition of his outstanding status as a bona fide exponent of the oral Torah. Aside from being revered by Jewish historians, Maimonides also figures very prominent in the history of Islamic and Arab sciences, and it is mentioned extensively in studies. Influenced by Al-Farabi. Now, who was Al-Farabi? We want to see who influenced him. Al-Farabi was Persian. Abu Nasr al-Farabi, known in the West as Al-Farabius. Now you see, Al-Farabius is probably a Greek translation of the Persian name Abu Nasr al-Farabi. See? And if you see this word Al-Farabius somewhere, you're not going to connect it to Al-Farabi, the Persian, see, because they moved it to a Greek name. And Al-Farabi was an Islamic philosopher and a jurist who wrote political philosophy, metaphysics, ethics, and logic. And he was also a scientist. He was also a cosmologist, a mathematician, and a musical scholar. He was known as the second teacher. What does that mean, the second teacher? The second teacher known to Aristotle as the first teacher. So that's a prestigious title to call him the second teacher, because most of the people that were influential philosophers in those days followed Aristotle. So for Al-Farabi to be known as second to Aristotle was in that particular time in culture was an incredible title. He was credited with preserving the original Greek texts during the Middle Ages because of his commentaries. He influenced prominent philosophers such as Avicenna and Maimonides. See? He influenced Maimonides. All right, let's continue. The second person on this list who Maimonides was influenced by was Avicenna. Avicenna, where are you, Avicenna? Come here. All right, Avicenna was Persian, also known as Abu Ali Sina, and often known in the West as Avicenna. He was a polymath who is regarded as one of the most significant physicians, astronomers, thinkers, and writers of the Islamic Golden Age, and the father of early modern medicine. Sajid H. Rizvi has called Avicenna arguably the most influential philosopher of the pre-modern era. He was a Muslim peripatetic philosopher influenced by Aristotelian philosophy. Of the 450 works he is believed to have written, around 240 have survived, including 150 on philosophy and 40 on medicine. Isn't this amazing how much has survived from this particular time in history? We're talking about C980, okay? C980, and we don't even know who Paul's mother and father was, Apostle Paul's mother and father was, or we don't know anything about his family, and we don't know where he was for all those years that he was missing, but yet we have all this history. Doesn't that kind of make you wonder? Makes me wonder. His most famous works are the Book of Healing, a philosophical and scientific encyclopedia, and the Canon of Medicine. It's a medical encyclopedia that he wrote, which became a standard medical text at many medieval universities and remained in use as late as 1650. Now, besides philosophy and medicine, Avicenna's corpus includes his writings on astronomy, alchemy, geography, geology, psychology, Islamic theology, logic, mathematics, physics, and works of poetry. And his contemporary Averroes. Now, who is Averroes? Here it is, Averroes. Averroes, Averroes. All right. Ibn Rushd is his name, and he's Arabic. And he Romanized Abu al-Walid Muhammad ibn Hamad ibn Rushd, the 14th of April, 1126, often Latinized as Averroes, was a Muslim Andalusian polymath and jurist who wrote about many subjects, including philosophy, theology, medicine, astronomy, physics, psychology, mathematics, Islamic jurisprudence and law, and linguistics. The author of more than 100 books and treatises, his philosophical works include numerous commentaries on Aristotle, for which he was known in the West as the commentator and the father of rationalism. Ibn Rushd also served as chief judge and a court physician for the Almohad Caliphate. Averroes was a strong proponent of the Aristotelianism. He attempted to restore what he considered the original teachings of Aristotle and opposed the Neoplatonist tendencies of earlier Muslim thinkers such as Al-Farabi and Avicenna, which I just read. So he was an opposer of the first two philosophers that influenced Maimonides. He also defended the pursuit of philosophy against criticism by Ash'ari theologians such as Al-Ghazali. Averroes argued that philosophy was permissible in Islam and even compulsory among certain elites. He also argued scriptural text should be interpreted allegorically. It appeared to contradict conclusions reached by reason and philosophy. Okay, in Islamic jurisprudence, he wrote the Bayat al-Mujtahid on the differences between Islamic schools of law and the principles that caused their differences. All right, so now we're going back to our story. After he was influenced by all these people, he became a prominent philosopher and polymath in both the Jewish and the Islamic worlds. His Hebrew name, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, whose acronym Rambam, his full Arabic name is Abu Amram Musa bin Maimun bin Ubadallah al-Qurtabi. Ubadallah should not imply that Maimon's father was named Obadiah. Instead, bin Ubadallah is treated as Maimonides' surname, as Obadiah was the name of his earliest direct ancestor. In Latin, the Hebrew ben, which means son of, becomes the Greek-style patronymic suffix forming Moses, Maimonides. And his biography in the early years, Maimonides was born in 1138 in Cordoba, Andalusia, in the Berber Muslim-ruled Almoravid Empire during what some scholars consider to be the end of the golden age of Jewish culture in the Iberian Peninsula, after the first centuries of the Moorish rule. His father, Maimon ben Joseph, was a Spanish Dayan, which is a Jewish judge, whose family claimed direct paternal descent from Simeon ben Judah Hanazi, and thus from the Davidic line. Maimonides later stated that there are 38 generations between him and Judah Hanazi. At an early age, Maimonides developed an interest in sciences and philosophy. He read those Greek philosophers accessible in Arabic translations and was deeply immersed in the sciences and learning of Islamic culture. Maimonides was not known as a supporter of Kabbalah, although a strong intellectual type of mysticism has been discerned in his philosophy. He expressed disapproval of poetry, the best of which he declared to be false, since it was founded on pure invention. This sage, you see, he was a sage. Maimonides was a sage who was revered for his personality as well as for his writings, and he led a busy life and wrote many of his works while traveling or in temporary accommodation. Maimonides studied Torah under his father, who had in turn studied under Rabbi Joseph ibn Magash, which was a student of Isaac Alfazi. Okay. Now the exile comes. Another Berber dynasty, the Almohads, conquered Cordoba in 1148 and abolished dhimmi status, for example, state protection of non-Muslims ensured through payment of a tax in some of their territories. The loss of this status left the Jewish and the Christian communities with conversion to Islam, death, or exile. That was the choices. Many Jews were forced to convert, but due to suspicion by the authorities of fake conversions, the new converts had to wear identifying clothing that set them apart and made them subject to public scrutiny. Now, who do you know? Which type of Jews do you know in the world that have different clothing, that don't dress like anyone else? And they do that to set themselves apart from the world. Those are the Hasidic Jews, especially the Chabad, the ones in Brooklyn. I think you know which ones I'm talking about. Maimonides' family, along with most other Jews, chose exile. Some say, though, that it is likely that Maimonides feigned a conversion to Islam before escaping. This forced conversion was ruled legally invalid under Islamic law when brought up by a rival in Egypt. For the next 10 years, Maimonides moved about in southern Spain and eventually settling in Fez in Morocco. During this time, he composed his acclaimed commentary on Mishnah during the years 1166 to 1168. Following this sojourn in Morocco, together with 2 sons, he sojourned in the land of Israel before settling in Fusat in Fatimid Caliphate-controlled Egypt around 1168. While in Cairo, he studied in a yeshiva attached to a small synagogue which now bears his name. In the land of Israel, he prayed at the Temple Mount. He wrote that this day of visiting the Temple Mount was a day of holiness for him and his descendants. Maimonides shortly thereafter was instrumental in helping rescue Jews taken captive during the Christian Amalric of Jerusalem's siege of the southeastern Nile Delta town of Bilbius. He sent 5 letters to the Jewish communities of Lower Egypt asking them to pool money together to pay the ransom. The money was collected and then given to 2 judges sent to Palestine to negotiate with the Crusaders. The captives were eventually released. Following this triumph, the Maimonides family, hoping to increase their wealth, gave their savings to his brother, the youngest son, David ben Maimon, a merchant. Maimonides directed his brother to procure goods only at the Sudanese port of Adihab after a long, arduous trip through the desert. However, David was unimpressed by the goods on offer there. Against his brother's wishes, David boarded a ship for India, since great wealth was to be found in the East. Before he could reach his destination, David drowned at the sea sometime between 1169 and 1177. The death of his brother caused Maimonides to become sick with grief. In a letter discovered in Cairo, Genizia, he wrote, now this is a letter Maimonides wrote, "The greatest misfortune that has befallen me during my entire life, worse than anything else, was the demise of the saint. May his memory be blessed who drowned in the Indian Sea, carrying much money belonging to me, to him, and to others, and left me with a little daughter and a widow. On the day I received that terrible news, I fell ill, and I remained in bed for about a year, suffering from a sore boil, fever, and depression, and was almost given up. About 8 years have passed, but I am still mourning and unable to accept consolation. And how should I console myself? He grew up on my knees. He was my brother, and he was my student." Around 1171, Maimonides was appointed the Nagid of the Egyptian Jewish community. Arabist Shlomo Dov Goiten believes the leadership he displayed during the ransoming of the Crusader captives led to this particular appointment. However, he was replaced by Shah Shalom ben Moses in 1173. Over the controversial course of Shah Shalom's appointment, during which Shah Shalom was accused of tax farming, Maimonides excommunicated and fought with him for several years until Maimonides was appointed Nagid in 1195. So he fought him and took the title back, the position back. A work known as Megilat Zuta was written by Abraham ben Halil, who writes a scathing description of Shah Shalom while praising Maimonides as the light of the East and the West and the unique master and marvel of the generation. With the loss of the family funds tied up in David's business venture, Maimonides assumed the vocation of physician, for which he was to become famous. He had trained in medicine both in Cordoba and in Fez, gaining widespread recognition. He was appointed court physician to the Grand Vizier al-Qadi al-Fidil, then to Sultan Saladin, after whose death he remained a physician to the Ayyubid dynasty. In his medical writings, Maimonides described many conditions, including asthma, diabetes, hepatitis, and pneumonia. And he emphasized moderation and a healthy lifestyle. His treatise became influential for generations of physicians. He was knowledgeable about Greek and Arabic medicine and followed the principles of humorism in the tradition of Galen. He did not blindly accept authority, but used his own observation and experience. Julia Best-Frank indicates that Maimonides, in his medical writings, sought to interpret works of authorities so that they could become acceptable. Maimonides displayed in his interactions with patients attributes that today would be called intercultural awareness and respect for the patient's autonomy. Though he frequently wrote of his longing for solitude in order to come closer to God and to extend his reflections, elements considered essential in his philosophy to the prophetic experience, he gave over most of his time to caring for others. In a famous letter, Maimonides describes his daily routine. After visiting the Sultan's palace, he would arrive home exhausted and hungry, where, quote, I would find the chambers filled with Gentiles and Jews. I would go to heal them and write prescriptions for their illnesses until the evening, and I would be extremely weak. As he goes on to say in this letter, even on Shabbat, he would receive members of the community. It is remarkable that he managed to write extended treatises, including not only medical and other scientific studies, but some of the most systematically thought through and influential treatises on halakha, religious law, and Jewish philosophy of the Middle Ages. Joseph Caro later praised Maimonides, writing of him, quotes, Maimonides is the greatest of the decisors of Jewish law, and all communities of the land of Israel and of Arabia and of Maghreb base their practices after him and have taken him upon themselves as their rabbi. Maimonides wrote his famous epic to Yemen. It has been suggested at his incessant travail undermined his own health and brought about his death at 69, although this is a normal lifespan. The death of Maimonides. He died on December 12, 1204, 20th of Tevet in the year 4965 in Fustat. It is widely believed that he was briefly buried in the Beth Midrash of the synagogue courtyard, and that soon after, in accordance with his wishes, his remains were exhumed and taken to Tiberias, where he was re-entered. The tomb of Maimonides on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee in Israel marks his grave. This location for his final resting place has been debated. For the Jewish Karine community, a tradition holds that he remained buried in Egypt. Maimonides and his wife, the daughter of Mishael ben Yeshheyahu Halevi, had one child who survived into adulthood, Abraham Maimonides, who became recognized as a great scholar. He succeeded Maimonides as Nagid and as court physician at the age of 18. Throughout his career, he defended his father's writings against all critics. The office of Nagid was held by the Maimonides family for 4 successive generations until the end of the 14th century. Maimonides is widely respected in Spain, and a statue of him was erected near the Cordoba synagogue. Maimonides is sometimes said to be a descendant of King David, although he never made such a claim. There's also something called the 13 Principles of Faith. In his commentary on the Mishnah, Tractate Sanhedrin, chapter 10, Maimonides formulates his 13 principles of faith. They summarized what he viewed as the required beliefs of Judaism. And I'll just read you the list of 13. One is the existence of God. 2 is the God's unity and indivisibly into elements. 3 is God's spirituality and incorporality. 4 is God's eternity. 5 is God alone should be the object of worship. 6 is revelation through God's prophets. 7 is the preeminence of Moses among the prophets. 8 is that the entire Torah, both the written and the oral law, are of divine origin and were dictated to Moses by God on Mount Sinai. The Torah given by Moses is permanent and will not be replaced or changed. 10 is God's awareness of all human actions and thoughts. 11 is regard of righteousness and the punishment. And 12 is the coming of the Jewish Messiah. And 13 is the resurrection of the dead. Okay, this is a picture of Maimonides that is in the White House in the United States. Let me read to you what it says. It says, Maimonides, Jewish philosopher, Cordoba, Spain, compiled a systematic exposition of the whole Jewish law as contained in the Pentateuch and the Talmudic literature. The 23 marbled relief portraits over the gallery doors of the House chambers in the U.S. Capitol depict historical figures noted for their work in establishing the principles that underlie American law. They were installed when the chamber was remodeled in 1949 and 1950. As you can see, here are the 23 marble relief portraits in the gallery, over the gallery doors of the House chamber in the United States Capitol. And I'm going to show you a map and give you the names of each one of these lawgivers that are being honored in the United States White House. This is the layout of the 23 marble relief portraits over the gallery doors of the chambers in the United States Capitol. And I'm going to go through each portrait with you and the titles that they give them. Alfonso the Wise, King of L'Écoute and Castile, author of the Royal Code, a compilation of local legislation for general use, originator of the 7 parts, the Code, used as a basis for Spanish jurisprudence. His religion was Roman Catholicism. He was nicknamed the astrologer, and that led him to sponsor the creation of the Alphonsine tables, which was data provided for computing the position of the sun, the moon, and the planets relative to fixed stars. And the Alphonsus crater, which was named after him on the moon. He wrote the Siete Partidas, the 7-part code, during the reign of Alfonso of Castile. Rules for the kingdom, later called the Book of Laws, described as humanist encyclopedia, as it addresses philosophical, moral, and theological topics as well, including the Greco-Roman and Judeo-Christian and Islamic viewpoints. Edward, King of England, nicknamed Longshanks because he was 6'2", founded the Parliamentary Constitution of England, eliminated the divisive political effects of the feudal system. What was the feudal system? It was a structure like a pyramid where the king was at the apex, the point at the top, and the villeins, or the peasants, the plebeians, the common people of the country, were at the base. In between the two were several groups of people who were vassals to those directly above, meaning that they swore loyalty to them. Each group of the people were granted land and protection by those above in return for services. A form of the feudal system existed in Anglo-Saxon times, even before the Norman conquest. Across Europe, and countries were organized in a structured way. In England, the land was granted to the earls and the barons, approved by the Witan, the highest council in the land. Each area of land was administered by the earl, who ensured laws were enforced. The earl was given the full right to govern as he saw fit. Sometimes this meant the rule was tyrannical, one where the common people suffered great hardships. Gaius, he was a Roman jurist and author of numerous works, the most noted being the Institutes, which was a complete exposition of the elements of Roman law that were the foundation of Roman civil law. George Mason, an American political leader, drafted the Virginia Constitution and Declaration of Rights in 1776. He was a member of the Constitutional Convention of 1787, led opposition to the ratification of the Constitution until the Bill of Rights was added. Gregory, a medieval pope, author of a compilation of decretals, which were authoritative decisions on canon law, during a critical period when he was instrumental in maintaining the remnants of Roman law. Hammurabi, king of Babylonia, author of the Code of Hammurabi, which is recognized in legal literature as one of the earliest surviving legal codes. This code is a well-preserved Babylonian code of law of ancient Mesopotamia, which is dated about 1752 BC. It is one of the oldest deciphered writings of significant length in the world. The sixth Babylonian king, Hammurabi, enacted this code. A partial copy exists on a 2.25 meter tall stone stele. It consists of 282 laws with scaled punishments adjusting, quotes, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, unquote, as graded based on social stratification depending of social status and gender, of slave versus free, man versus woman. Nearly half of the code deals with matters of contract, establishing the wages to be paid to an ox driver or a surgeon, for example. Other provisions set the terms of a transaction, of the liability of a builder for a house that collapses, or property that is damaged while left in the care of another. A third of the code addresses issues concerning household and family relationships, such as inheritance, divorce, paternity, and reproductive behavior. Hugo Grotius, Dutch statesman, Advocate General of Holland and Zeeland, author of On the Law of War and Peace, the first treatise on international law. He was a major figure in the fields of philosophy, political theory, and law during the 16th and the 17th century. He laid the foundations for international law based on natural law in its Protestant side. Innocent III, medieval pope, student of canon and civil law who, like Gregory, preserved the remnants of Roman law during the Dark Ages. Jean-Baptiste Colbert, French finance minister and controller in general under Louis XIV, codified commercial, maritime, and colonial ordinances reformed the French legal system. Justinian I, a Byzantine emperor, appointed Tribuzonian to compile and consolidate the Roman legal code into the Justinian Code, which he supplemented with a collection of rulings and precedents. Justinian I, Byzantine emperor, he was appointed Tribuzonian to compile and consolidate the Roman legal code into the Justinian Code, which he supplemented with a collection of rulings and precedents. Lycurgus, semi-mythical Greek legislator, traditional author of Laws and Institution of Sparta. Maimonides, a Jewish philosopher of Cordoba, Spain, compiled a systematic exposition of the whole of Jewish law as contained in the Pentateuch and the Talmudic literature. Okay, Moses, the Moses that we all know who gave us the Ten Commandments. He's listed as a Hebrew prophet and lawgiver, transformed a wandering people into a nation, received the Ten Commandments. Note that they don't list him as a Hebrew Jew. They list him as a Hebrew prophet and a lawgiver. Napoleon, Emperor of France, appointed a commission to draw up the Code Civil, a combination of tradition and Roman law that influenced the legal systems of Europe and American states during the 19th century. Papinian, Roman jurist, author of 56 books about legal questions and decisions, extracts from which were influential in the development of the Justinian Code. Robert Joseph Pardieu, French jurist, author of the Digest of Pandects of Justinian, a classic study of Roman law, author of several treatises of French law which were incorporated into the French Code Civil. St. Louis, King Louis of France, author of the Mise of Amends, a judgment on a dispute between Henry III and rebellious English barons. Simon de Montfort, English statesman, advocated representative government, established an early form of representative government in England. Solon, Athenian statesman and author of constitutional and legal reforms. Suleiman, a sultan of the Ottoman Empire who reformed and improved civil and military codes, united a group of unstable territories into an empire. Thomas Jefferson, third President of the United States, wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Statute of Virginia for religious freedom. Tribonian, Byzantine jurist, head of the commission that codified the laws under Justinian I. Sir William Blackstone, English jurist, Professor of Common Law at Oxford, author of the Commentaries on the Laws of England, which had considerable influence on the importation and adaptation of English common law in America. What is Jewish philosophy? Jewish philosophy includes all philosophy carried out by Jews, or in relation to the religion of Judaism. Until modern Haskalah, which is Jewish enlightenment and Jewish emancipation, Jewish philosophy was preoccupied with attempts to reconcile coherent new ideas into the tradition of rabbinic Judaism, thus organizing emergent ideas that are not necessarily Jewish into a uniquely Jewish scholastic framework and worldview. With their acceptance into modern society, Jews with secular educations embraced or developed entirely new philosophies to meet the demands of the world in which they now found themselves. Medieval rediscovery of ancient Greek philosophy among the genome of the 10th century Babylonian academies brought rationalist philosophy into biblical Talmudic Judaism. The philosophy was generally in competition with Kabbalah. Both schools would become a part of classic rabbinic literature. Though the decline of scholastic rationalism coincided with historical events which drew Jews to the Kabbalistic approach, for Ashkenazi Jews, emancipation and encounter with secular thought from the 18th century onwards altered how philosophy was viewed. Ashkenazi and Sephardi communities had later more ambivalent interactions with secular culture than in Western Europe. In the varied responses to modernity, Jewish philosophical ideas were developed across the range of emerging religious movements. These developments could be seen as either continuations or of breaks from the canon of rabbinic philosophy of the Middle Ages, as well as the other historical dialectic aspects of Jewish thought, and resulted in diverse contemporary Jewish attitudes to philosophical methods.